I never thought gratitude could come with a price tag. Last Sunday, I stopped by my son's house just to thank my daughter-in-law for taking such good care of my grandchildren. Olivia smiled that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes and said, "If you really want to show gratitude, Edward, you can pay me." At first, I laughed, thinking she was joking. But she didn't laugh back. She crossed her arms and waited. Something inside me went quiet. I've faced construction deadlines, corporate politics, even the loneliness of losing my wife, but nothing prepares you for the moment your own family turns love into business. So, I smiled instead. "All right, Olivia," I said gently. "If that's what you want." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote her a short note, slid it into an ivory envelope, and sealed it carefully. The next morning, I stopped by their house again, handed her the envelope, and thanked her for all her effort. She thought it was cash. When she opened it and saw what was inside, her face drained of color. Then came the scream, sharp, echoing down the quiet suburban street, the sound of shock, betrayal, and justice finally waking up. When I pulled into Jonathan's driveway that afternoon, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the row of elms that bordered the street. It had been nearly 3 weeks since I'd last seen Noah and Ella, and the silence of my house had grown too heavy to ignore. I carried a small paper bag with a box of puzzles for the kids and a bottle of Cabernet for my son and daughter-in-law. The moment I rang the doorbell, I could hear the chaos inside: tiny feet, laughter, and the faint hum of a cartoon theme song. Olivia opened the door still wearing her workout leggings and an oversized sweatshirt. Her hair was tied up in a careless bun, and there was an edge of exhaustion in her eyes. "Edward," she said, forcing a smile. "You didn't call first." "I wanted to surprise the little ones," I replied. "You look busy. Everything all right?" She leaned against the doorframe, exhaling. "Oh, you know, Jonathan's at the office again, the kids have been a handful. I barely have time to breathe, let alone shower." "I remember those days," I said kindly. "You're doing a great job, Olivia. They're happy, healthy. That's all that matters." Something flickered across her face, pride mixed with irritation. "A great job," she repeated. "Well, it doesn't come free, does it?" I chuckled, thinking she was making a joke. "Parenting rarely does. Believe me, I know." But her tone didn't soften. "No, I mean it, Edward. You get to drop by, play the sweet grandpa for an hour, and go home to peace and quiet. I'm here 24/7, cooking, cleaning, driving them everywhere. It's work." Her voice carried a sharpness that caught me off guard. "I just wanted to stop by to say thank you," I said slowly. "You've been wonderful with the kids, and I know it's not easy." She folded her arms. "If you really want to thank me, pay me for my time." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "I'm serious." She tilted her head, half smiling but with no warmth. "If you want to show gratitude, maybe write a check. I mean, Jonathan and I could use the help. You have that big retirement fund just sitting there, right?" Her words landed like ice water. I took a slow breath, forcing calm into my tone. "Olivia, I've helped more than you realize. The down payment on this house, the renovations, the kids' private school fund, those weren't gifts from a stranger. That was years ago," she said quickly. "Things are different now. Expenses are higher. Inflation, you know." Before I could answer, Noah's voice broke through from the living room. "Grandpa." He ran out, his hair sticking up in every direction, followed closely by Ella holding a stuffed rabbit. Their joy hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I knelt to hug them both, and for a moment the tension faded. "Did you bring the puzzle, Grandpa?" Ella asked, her eyes wide. "I sure did. Maybe we can build it together." From behind me, Olivia cleared her throat. "Dinner's in an hour, kids. Grandpa can't stay long." The disappointment on their faces stung. "It's all right," I said softly. "We'll build it next time." Olivia disappeared into the kitchen, and Jonathan appeared a few minutes later, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened. "Dad," he greeted, clearly exhausted. "Didn't know you were stopping by." "I just came to check in," I said, handing him the wine. "How's work?" "Never ending," he muttered. "We're short-staffed, and Olivia's been holding down the fort here." "She's amazing, really." "I can see that," I replied carefully. "Though she seems a little overwhelmed." Jonathan's eyes darted toward the kitchen. "She's tired. Don't take it personally." "I won't." When I left that evening, I noticed Olivia watching me from the window. Her arms were crossed again, her expression unreadable. I gave a polite wave. She didn't return it. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee and read the paper, my phone chimed. An email notification from Olivia Hale. I opened it without thinking. Subject: Invoice Childcare Services. Body: Dear Edward, since you've acknowledged my hard work caring for Noah and Ella, I've attached an invoice reflecting the fair value of my time and effort. Please review and remit payment at your earliest convenience. Below was a neatly formatted PDF attachment. 160 hours x $25 per hour equals $4,000. Due upon receipt. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or feel insulted. Then I noticed the final line in italics. Thank you for recognizing that love alone doesn't pay the bills. I closed my laptop slowly. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, birdsong drifting through the morning air. Love doesn't pay the bills. I'd spent my life believing love was the only thing that did pay them, the only currency that ever held its value. I didn't know it yet, but that email marked the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight. And the weapon I'd use wouldn't be anger or revenge. It would be a single, carefully prepared envelope. I didn't reply to Olivia's email that morning. Instead, I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and poured another cup of coffee. The house was silent, too silent for the kind of thoughts forming in my head. I stared at the steam curling from my mug, trying to convince myself this was just one of Olivia's bad moods. Maybe she'd been overwhelmed. Maybe the invoice was her twisted sense of humor. But by noon, another email arrived. Subject: Friendly reminder, unpaid invoice. Hi Edward. Just following up on my earlier message. I haven't seen payment come through. Please send by Friday. Thanks for understanding. Olivia. Attached was the same PDF, but this time she'd added a late fee, $75. A late fee. My first instinct was to call Jonathan, but I waited. My son hated confrontation, always had. As a kid, if a teacher scolded him, he'd go mute for days. I used to think it meant he was thoughtful. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, I called anyway. He answered on the second ring, sounding distracted. Dad? Everything okay? Jonathan, I just got an email from Olivia. Yeah. She sent me an invoice. There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear someone's brain spinning. An invoice? For taking care of your kids. $4,000. And a late fee, in case I miss her deadline. He exhaled. Dad, come on, she's joking. It didn't read like a joke. She's been under a lot of stress. Noah's soccer, Ella's ballet, my work schedule's juggling a lot. Sometimes she says things she doesn't mean. Then she has a strange way of expressing herself. Please, don't make a big deal out of this. I'll talk to her, okay? I wanted to believe him. I really did. But when I hung up, the pit in my stomach told me not to. 3 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a printed copy of the same invoice, neatly folded, stapled, and signed at the bottom. In blue ink, Olivia had added a handwritten note. Edward, I'm not joking. I'm doing the work of two parents while Jonathan's gone all day. The least you can do is recognize that with real compensation. At the bottom she'd written her bank details. I sat at my kitchen table, letter trembling slightly in my hand. Recognition. Compensation. Those words didn't belong in a family. They belonged in a business contract. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought of Noah's grin when he solved a puzzle, of Ella's laugh when she tried to braid my thinning hair. How could anyone put a price tag on that? The next morning, I drove to Jonathan's house. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to look my daughter-in-law in the eye. Olivia opened the door wearing a silk robe, holding a cup of coffee. Edward, she said evenly, you got my invoice, I assume. I did. And? I studied her for a moment. Her tone was light, but her posture was defensive, shoulders squared, chin lifted. She wasn't embarrassed. She was serious. I came to ask what exactly you're trying to accomplish, I said. I'm tired, she said flatly. Tired of being taken for granted. Everyone expects me to handle the kids, the house, the bills, and still smile through it all. So yes, if you want to thank me for what I do, I expect it to mean something. It already does, I said quietly. It means you're a mother. It means you love your children. She smirked. Love doesn't pay for braces or tuition. You of all people should understand money, Edward. You built a life on it. I looked past her into the living room. Toys scattered, laundry piled, a half-finished glass of wine on the counter. You think money built that? I asked softly. Olivia crossed her arms. If you're not going to pay, then maybe you should stop dropping by unannounced. It confuses the kids. They think you're around because you care. But if you cared, you'd help. I have helped, I said firmly. More than you know. She scoffed. You mean that loan you keep reminding Jonathan about? That was ages ago. I never reminded him, I said. I trusted him. Well, she said, stepping closer, trust doesn't keep the lights on. I stared at her for a long moment, seeing her not as the woman who married my son, but as someone who'd lost sight of what family meant. I'll think about it, I said finally, turning toward the door. She smiled again, tight, victorious. That's all I wanted to hear. When I got home, I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out an old leather notebook. I hadn't written in it for years, not since my wife, Anne, passed. Inside were meticulous records, payments, receipts, every check I'd ever written to Jonathan over the years. Page after page told a story of generosity I'd never kept score of until now. Home loan, $85,000. Tuition fund, $20,000. Emergency repairs, $7,500. Total, $112,500. All of excellent, unconditional, unacknowledged. I closed the book, my jaw tightening. Olivia wanted to turn gratitude into a transaction. Maybe it was time she learned what real business looked like. I spent the next few days in silence, letting Olivia's words settle like dust in an empty house. It had been years since anyone made me feel this kind of cold, hollow disappointment. Not anger I could manage, but disappointment, that quiet ache that seeps into your bones when you realize someone close has stopped valuing decency. That Saturday morning, I walked into my study and opened the oak cabinet that had been untouched for a decade. Inside were the records I'd kept since my engineering days: blueprints, contracts, tax files, and one fireproof folder labeled Jonathan Langford Property Documents. The paper smelled faintly of old ink and time. I placed the folder on the desk and sat down, the chair creaking beneath me like it was sharing the weight of what I was about to face. The first document was a copy of a cashier's check from 7 years ago, $85,000 made out to First Meridian Bank. I remembered the day I'd written it. Jonathan had called, voice trembling. Dad, we found the perfect house. The bank says we need to close by next week or we lose it. He'd promised to repay me within 3 years. There had been no reason not to trust him. He was my only son. Under the check was a notarized loan agreement, signed by all three of us: Jonathan, Olivia, and Mueth. Clear terms, secured loan against property located at 915, Brookdale Lane, repayment within 36 months. At the bottom, embossed in raised ink, was the notary seal of Reynolds and Associates. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I hadn't looked at those papers since the day they signed them. I'd told myself it was just a formality, a technical safeguard in case anything happened. But now, that formality might be the only leverage I had left. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Reynolds' law office, came the same crisp, professional voice I remembered. "This is Edward Langford," I said. "I need to speak with Mr. Reynolds. It's about a loan he notarized for me, Brookdale Lane property, 7 years ago." A brief pause. "Of course, Mr. Langford. He'll be with you shortly." A click, then the familiar, gravelly tone of an old friend. "Edward. I haven't heard from you since the Tampa project. How are you?" "Still breathing, which is more than I can say for my patience," I replied. He chuckled. "I assume this isn't a social call." "No. I need to confirm whether the Brookdale loan we structured is still enforceable." Reynolds hesitated. "Let me pull up the file. Yes. March 2018. Secured lien, recorded properly. There's been no release filed, which means the loan is still active, Edward. You technically retain a priority interest in the property. So if repayment hasn't been made, you have every legal right to reclaim the collateral," he said plainly. "That house is, in the eyes of the law, yours." I closed my eyes, absorbing the weight of his words. "Yours. Edward," he continued, "I hope this isn't about a family feud. It's about a lesson, Robert. One I've avoided teaching for too long." He sighed. "Be careful. Legal battles between blood can turn uglier than any corporate one." "I don't want a battle," I said quietly. "I just want respect. For what I've already given." After hanging up, I sat at the desk staring at the documents spread before me. The logical part of meth engineer could see the structure clearly: terms, signatures, clauses, obligations. But another part, the father in me, only saw the years of quiet help, the down payments, the babysitting, the unspoken hope that my son would build something stronger than money. I ran a hand over the embossed notary seal. That small circle of raised paper suddenly felt like armor. Late that night, I drafted a letter. Not a lawyer's letter, not yet, just a personal note written in my own steady handwriting. "Dear Olivia. You once told me love doesn't pay the bills. Maybe you're right. But there are other debts in this family that remain unpaid, ones measured not in affection but in ink and paper. I've attached a copy of the loan agreement I signed years ago, so you understand exactly what kind of generosity you've been living in. You wanted a transaction. Very well. Let's settle it properly. Edward." I placed the original loan documents into a fresh folder, labeled it Brookdale 2025, and slid it into my briefcase. The moonlight through the blinds cast pale bars across the papers on my desk. The house was still, but my thoughts weren't. Olivia had turned gratitude into an invoice. I was about to turn memory into evidence. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted business, Olivia. You're about to get business." And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. By Monday morning, the decision was made. I'd spent the weekend rereading the documents, weighing guilt against principle. Every time I hesitated, I heard Olivia's voice echoing, "If you really want to thank me, pay me." That line had become a trigger, a reminder of how far things had fallen. After breakfast, I ironed a fresh shirt, the kind I used to wear to board meetings, and sat at my desk. On the surface in front of me lay a blank sheet of ivory stationery and the signed loan agreement. I smoothed the paper flat with both hands before I started to write. Dear Olivia. You've made it clear you see our family through the lens of transactions. Consider this my response in kind. Enclosed, you'll find official documentation outlining the terms of repayment for the Brookdale property terms you and Jonathan agreed to 7 years ago. Since no payments have ever been made, I am exercising my right to recover what remains legally mine. This is not an act of revenge. It's an act of responsibility. You asked for a price, and I'm showing you what one looks like. Edward Langford. I read the letter twice. The tone was calm, professional, almost cold. But every word was true. I folded the letter neatly, placed it on top of the notarized copy of the loan agreement, and slid both into a cream-colored envelope. Then I sealed it, pressing the flap shut with a deliberate finality. On the front, in my neat handwriting, I wrote, "For Olivia." That was all it said. No address, no explanation. Just her name. For a few seconds, I sat staring at it. The weight of the envelope seemed heavier than paper and ink. It carried years of silence, patience, and misplaced trust. At 10 o'clock, I drove to Brookdale Lane. My hands didn't shake, but my heartbeat was steady and loud in my ears. When I pulled up in front of their house, Noah and Ella were playing on the lawn. The sight of them almost broke me. Noah was riding his bike in circles, Ella was trying to teach a squirrel how to eat a cracker. They spotted my car and ran toward me, shouting, "Grandpa." I stepped out and knelt to hug them. Their arms around my neck reminded me exactly why I was doing this. "Did you bring more puzzles?" Ella asked. "Next time, sweetheart," I said softly. "I just came to see your mom for a minute." Olivia appeared at the doorway, phone in one hand, annoyance already etched into her expression. She wore a fitted blazer like she was heading into a meeting. "Edward," she said flatly. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," I replied calmly. "This won't take long." She crossed her arms. "If this is about the invoice, Jonathan said he'd talk to you." "It's not about the invoice," I said. "It's about something much older than that." Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. The movement was slow, deliberate. "This," I said, holding it out to her, "is what you've earned." Her eyes brightened instantly with a flicker of triumph. She thought she'd won, that I'd finally caved, that I'd filled the envelope with cash to buy peace. "Well," she said with a smile, "I didn't think you'd actually take me seriously, Edward." She took the envelope from my hand and stepped back into the doorway. "At least now we understand each other." I didn't answer. I just watched as she tore the flap open, eager. There was a pause. Then a rustle of papers. Her smile faltered. Her eyes moved across the text, scanning fast, then slower. Her face drained of color. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "It's the loan agreement for this house," I said. "And the notice of reclamation. I've given Jonathan 30 days to either repay what he owes or vacate the property." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then came the scream. It wasn't a cry of fear, it was fury, disbelief, raw panic. The kind that carries down the street and makes the neighbors peek through curtains. "You can't do this," she shouted. "You gave us this house." "No," I said evenly. "I loaned it to you. There's a difference. And you signed the papers acknowledging that." She shook the envelope at me like it was evidence of cruelty. "Jonathan will never let this stand." "Jonathan knows the truth," I said softly. "And deep down, so do you." Behind her, Noah and Ella stood frozen, confusion written across their faces. My heart cracked seeing it. I bent down to them. "It's all right, my loves," I said gently. "Grandpa's not angry. This is just something the adults need to sort out." Olivia's voice cracked into the air again. "Sort out? You're taking our home." I straightened, meeting her eyes. "No, Olivia. I'm taking back my self-respect." She glared at me, trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. "Get off my property." I turned toward my car, the envelope still clutched in her fist. As I walked away, I heard her voice behind me shaking now, less angry, more desperate. "Edward. You'll regret this." I didn't look back. The kids' laughter was gone. The street was quiet again, too quiet. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, and let out a long breath. It was done. The line had been drawn not in anger, but in ink, years ago. And all I'd done today was remind her where it was. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Noah's face, the confusion in his eyes when his mother screamed. I replayed that moment again and again, wondering if I could have handled it differently. But the truth kept echoing back: sometimes doing the right thing looks cruel to people who have lived too long without accountability. The next morning, my phone began to buzz before 7. It was Jonathan. "Dad," he said, voice tight. "What the hell did you do?" "I enforced an agreement your wife and you both signed. You served Olivia legal papers. You embarrassed her in front of the kids." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of fatigue pressing against me. "Jonathan, she left me no choice. She demanded payment for taking care of her own children. She crossed a line, and I drew one back." There was silence on the line, then a low, frustrated sigh. "You could have talked to me first." "I tried. Remember when I called you about the invoice? You said you'd handle it. You didn't. That was different." "No, it wasn't," I interrupted, my voice firmer now. "You've let her control the narrative for years, and I let you. But now it's over. This isn't just about money, Jonathan. It's about respect, yours, mine, and the family name your mother and I worked our whole lives to preserve." He said nothing for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his tone had softened. "Dad, she's scared. She thinks you're trying to destroy us." "I'm not destroying anything," I said quietly. "I'm forcing you to look at what you built on a lie." He didn't answer. The line went dead. That afternoon, I received another visitor. Olivia. She didn't knock, she stormed in, her heels striking my hardwood floor like gunfire. Her face was red, her mascara smudged. "You smug, heartless old man," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I imagine you're about to tell me," I said, staying seated at the table, the morning paper still spread open. "You humiliated me in front of my children. In front of my neighbors. You think you can just wave papers around and make me beg?" I folded the newspaper slowly, deliberately, and looked up at her. "You don't need to beg, Olivia. You need to grow up." Her eyes blazed. "You think you're teaching me a lesson? You're teaching Noah and Ella that cruelty runs in the family." I stood, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. "You're the one who put a price on love. You turned motherhood into a job description, gratitude into an invoice. What exactly were you teaching them?" She blinked rapidly, like the words had landed harder than she expected. Then her expression hardened again. "You'll never see those kids again," she said coldly. "I'll make sure of it." I didn't raise my voice. I just stepped closer, keeping my tone calm and level. "You can try. But those children will grow up, Olivia. And when they do, they'll remember who stood with honesty and who hid behind threats." She hesitated, trembling, before turning sharply and storming out. The house fell silent again. For the first time in years, I felt the full loneliness of it, but not the kind that eats you alive. This was a quieter loneliness, the kind that follows clarity. A week passed. Jonathan didn't call. Olivia didn't return. The neighborhood gossip spread quickly. Mrs. Parker, my next-door neighbor, mentioned she'd seen movers at their house packing, but not leaving yet. 30 days. That was the deadline. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed again. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. Grandpa? The voice was small, hesitant. Noah. Hey, buddy, I said softly, feeling my chest tighten. You're up late. I used Mom's phone. She's asleep. I swallowed hard. Everything okay? He hesitated. Mom's been crying a lot. Dad's mad all the time. Ella keeps asking why you don't come over anymore. I closed my eyes. It's complicated, Noah. Grown-up things. But I love you both very much, and none of this is your fault. I know, he whispered. Mom said you don't want us anymore. That you want our house. The words hit like a punch to the gut. No, son, I said quickly. That house was never about taking something away. It was about reminding your mom and dad that promises matter. Do you understand? I think so, he said quietly. I just miss you. I miss you, too. There was a pause. Can I still come fishing when this is over? My throat tightened. You bet, kiddo. We'll catch the biggest bass in the lake. He laughed softly. Okay. Good night, Grandpa. When the call ended, I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. I realized then that this wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about reclaiming a future where my grandchildren didn't grow up thinking love had to be bought. The following morning, I called Mr. Reynolds again. It's time, I told him. File the notice with the county. Let's make it official. You're sure? He asked. There's still room for negotiation. I gave them 7 years and my silence, I said. That's more negotiation than most men would offer. He sighed. All right. I'll file today. When I hung up, I looked out the window toward the old oak in my backyard. It had weathered storms, droughts, lightning. It leaned slightly now, scarred but unbroken. So was I. The silence in the house felt different that day, less lonely, more resolute. The battle lines had been drawn, and there was no going back. But beneath the noise, beneath the fury and the accusations, one truth remained steady: I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for meaning. For Noah. For Ella. And maybe, somewhere deep down, even for Jonathan, so he'd finally understand what kind of man his father really was. 2 weeks after filing the reclamation notice, I received the inevitable knock on my door. It wasn't polite. It wasn't hesitant. It was 3 sharp raps, angry, entitled, and familiar. When I opened the door, Jonathan stood there. His tie was crooked, his eyes red, and his posture screamed exhaustion mixed with humiliation. Behind him, his car idled at the curb, and in the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of Olivia, arms crossed, eyes dark and unblinking. Can I come in? He asked, voice tight. You can, I said, stepping aside. If you're here to talk. He walked in like a man entering enemy territory, glancing around as if the walls might start accusing him. He didn't sit. Neither did I. Dad, he began, I don't want this to turn into a war. It already is, I said evenly. You just didn't notice until you were losing. He winced. You're not being fair. I'm not being fair. I raised an eyebrow. I paid off your entire mortgage, Jonathan. I covered your emergencies, your loans, your so-called business ventures. Fair would have been you keeping your word. This, I gestured toward him, this is mercy. He ran a hand through his hair. You think evicting your own family is mercy? I think letting my grandchildren grow up believing greed is normal would have been cruelty. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The silence stretched between us dense, heavy, old. The kind of silence that carries every unspoken thing a father and son have avoided saying for years. Finally, he said quietly, she shouldn't have said what she did. About the money. About charging you to see the kids. That was wrong. It caught me off guard. I hadn't expected honesty, not this soon. But you filed a legal claim, Dad, he continued. You've made this public. Everyone knows. Olivia's humiliated. The kids are confused. Can't you drop it? Just this once. I studied him carefully. There was a tremor in his voice, fear, not of losing money, but of losing face. No, I said simply. You both made choices. Now you face consequences. Jonathan looked away, jaw tight. You've always been like this. Black and white. No middle ground. You're wrong, I said softly. There's always been gray. You just kept mistaking my forgiveness for weakness. He didn't answer. He turned toward the door, gripping the handle. Then I guess we'll see you in court. I nodded. Yes, we will. When he left, I stayed where I was for a long time, listening to the distant hum of his engine fading down the street. My heart hurt not from anger anymore, but from the weight of being right when I wished I wasn't. The first letter from their attorney arrived 3 days later. It was wrapped in that same arrogant tone lawyers use when they think intimidation still works. Mr. Langford's claims are unfounded. The property transfer was intended as a gift to the family. A gift. That word burned through me. A gift doesn't come with signatures, notarized seals, or repayment clauses. It's something you give freely. And I hadn't done that. I'd been cautious. I'd been responsible. And now, that caution was my defense. I called Mr. Reynolds. He sounded almost amused when I read the letter aloud. They're playing desperate, he said. They have no legal standing. We'll respond formally. Let me handle the filings. Do it, I said. Edward, he added, his tone softening, you're doing the right thing. I've seen families tear themselves apart over less. But sometimes drawing a line saves the generations after. His words stayed with me. Saves the generations after. That was all I cared about now. Noah and Ella. A few days later, I went to the park near their school, the one with the small lake and the crooked bench where I used to feed ducks with them on Sundays. I didn't expect to see them there. I just needed to remember what I was fighting for. And then, as if heaven decided to remind me why I hadn't given up, I saw them. Noah, taller now, was kicking a soccer ball with 2 other kids. Ella sat on the swings, twisting the chains and letting herself spin. Their laughter hit me like sunlight after a long storm. I stayed at a distance, not wanting to cause trouble, but when Noah looked up and spotted me, his eyes widened. Grandpa, he shouted. Olivia turned sharply from a bench nearby. Her face went pale. She started walking toward me fast, heels clicking against the pavement. Don't, she snapped. You don't get to show up like this. I held up my hands. I didn't come to start anything. I was just passing by. Her voice shook. You've already done enough. You've destroyed everything. I looked past her to the kids. They're doing fine. You haven't destroyed them yet. Her jaw dropped. You. But before she could finish, Noah ran past her and hugged me. For a second, I froze. Then I knelt, returning the hug, my throat tightening. Mom says we can't see you anymore, he whispered. But I told her I don't care. Olivia's voice cracked behind us. Noah! Get back here. I released him gently, looked him in the eyes, and said softly, always listen to your mother, son. Even when she's wrong. Then I stood and faced Olivia. You can keep me out of your house, Olivia. You can drag me to court. But you can't erase me from them. She stood there trembling, torn between anger and something that looked suspiciously like fear. I turned and walked away before she could speak. My hands shook, but not from weakness. From the weight of what I knew would come next. That night, as I sat alone at my kitchen table, I realized something. This wasn't just about a property, or even respect, it was about legacy. Olivia thought she was defending her family by fighting me. Jonathan thought he was protecting his pride. But I was protecting something older, something they'd forgotten. Principle. Integrity. Truth. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, raised it to the silent room, and whispered. To Noah and Ella. May they never forget that doing right is worth the cost. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The house felt steady anchored. The reckoning had begun. And I wasn't backing down. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and tension. I'd been in plenty of intimidating places in my life: corporate boardrooms, construction sites after accidents, hospital waiting rooms at 3 a.m. But this was different. This wasn't about business or tragedy. This was about family, stripped down to paper, signatures, and witnesses. Jonathan and Olivia were already there when I arrived. He wore a charcoal suit and the face of a man trying to look in control. She wore red, not the warm kind, but the sharp, hostile kind that makes you notice her before she speaks. When our eyes met, she didn't blink. Her attorney, a young man with too much confidence for his years, leaned toward her and whispered something that made her smirk. I took my seat beside my attorney, Robert Reynolds, who looked every bit the calm old fox he was. Remember, he said quietly, truth doesn't shout. It just stands still and lets the noise collapse. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Judge Meredith, entered and gave us all the kind of look that said she'd seen too many families tear themselves apart in her courtroom. Case 24-713B, Langford vs. Langford, she said. Property dispute regarding 915, Brookdale Lane. Let's begin. Olivia's attorney stood first. Your Honor, this is a simple case. Mr. Langford gifted his son and daughter-in-law a home in 2018 out of love and family devotion. He is now attempting to reverse that act of generosity, claiming it was a loan. Reynolds didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He waited until the young man sat down before standing with a slow, deliberate grace. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth but firm, my client did indeed provide funds in 2018 not as a gift, but as a secured loan, documented, notarized, and filed with the county. The defendant signed these documents voluntarily. Not only that, but not a single payment has ever been made. He walked to the judge's bench and handed over a neatly clipped stack of papers. Here is the original loan agreement, the notary seal, and the payment ledger confirming zero repayment over 7 years. Judge Meredith flipped through the pages. Her expression didn't change, but her posture straightened slightly, the sign of a judge who just found something substantial. Mr. Reynolds, she said, these are properly filed documents. They are, Your Honor. She turned to Olivia's attorney. Do you have evidence this was a gift? The young lawyer hesitated, glanced at Olivia, then said, we have testimony that Mr. Langford intended it as a gift. Reynolds almost smiled. Intent doesn't override documentation, counsel. Not in property law. Judge Meredith nodded. Proceed with your witness. Olivia took the stand. She looked nervous now, though she tried to hide it behind that same brittle smile. Mrs. Langford, her attorney said, did your father-in-law ever say this was a loan? She hesitated. Not directly. He said he wanted to help us, that he didn't expect anything in return. Did he ever ask you to make payments? No, she said quickly. Not until this year. Reynolds stood. May I cross-examine? The judge nodded. Mrs. Langford, Reynolds began gently, do you recognize your signature on this document? She looked down at the page. Yes. And that of your husband? Yes. Do you recall signing this in front of a notary? Her eyes darted to Jonathan, then back to Reynolds. Yes, but I didn't read all of it. That may be true, Reynolds said smoothly, but you did sign it. And this section here, he pointed, clearly identifies the transfer as a secured loan with repayment due within 36 months. Were you forced to sign this document? No, she whispered. Threatened? No. He paused for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Then, Mrs. Langford, would you agree that the terms were clear, and that you chose not to honor them? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. That will be all, Reynolds said, turning back toward me. Jonathan didn't testify. His silence spoke volumes. When closing arguments began, Olivia's attorney tried to frame me as a bitter old man using the law to punish his family. It might have worked on someone else. But Judge Meredith had seen too many versions of this story before. When Reynolds stood for the final statement, he didn't even glance at his notes. Your Honor, he said simply, love and law are two different currencies. Mr. Langford gave both freely. The defendants abused both carelessly. The documents tell the truth even when memory refuses to. The judge looked at us for a long moment, then spoke. The evidence presented is valid. The loan agreement stands. The property remains under Mr. Langford's secured ownership. The defendants are given 30 days to vacate the premises or submit a formal repayment plan approved by the court. Case closed. The gavel hit the block with a sharp, final crack that echoed like thunder. Olivia froze. Jonathan's head dropped into his hands. Reynolds gathered his papers quietly. It's over, he said, almost kindly. But it didn't feel over. Not yet. As I walked out of the courtroom, Olivia brushed past me. You think you've won? She hissed. You've destroyed your son. I met her eyes. No, Olivia. I've just stopped letting you destroy him yourself. She stared at me for a heartbeat, speechless, before storming out with Jonathan following behind, hollow-eyed and defeated. Reynolds placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the hard thing, Edward. Doing the hard thing, I said, isn't always the same as feeling right. Outside, the Florida sun hit my face. I took a deep breath. 30 days. That was all that remained before the eviction order became final. And somehow, I already knew Olivia wouldn't leave quietly. The battle in court had ended. But the war for my family's soul that was still ahead. The 30 days passed slower than any month of my life. Each sunrise brought silence, no calls, no letters, not even the sound of laughter drifting from Brookdale Lane when I drove by. Their house looked hollow now, blinds drawn, yard unkempt, the home I'd built for them slowly decaying under the weight of pride. On the final day, August 3rd, the deputy knocked at my door at 9 a.m. Sharp. His voice was steady but kind, the tone of a man who's done this before. Mr. Langford, he said, will be proceeding with the enforcement at noon. You're not required to attend. I'll be there, I replied. I started this. I'll see it through. When I arrived at Brookdale, 2 patrol cars sat at the curb. A moving truck idled nearby, its back door open. The air smelled of cardboard and resentment. Olivia stood on the porch with her arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Jonathan paced near the driveway, his movements frantic like a man trying to control a storm with bare hands. The deputies were professional, efficient. They read the order, offered courtesy, and waited. Jonathan muttered something under his breath, too low to catch. Olivia said nothing, just watched me like a hawk circling prey. When the movers began to carry boxes from the house, she finally broke. "You did this," she spat, her voice cracking. "You ruined everything." I kept my tone calm. "I didn't ruin it, Olivia. You built it on lies. It just couldn't stand." Jonathan turned on me, eyes bloodshot. "You could have forgiven us. You're my father." "I did forgive you," I said quietly. 7 years ago, when I paid off your mortgage and never asked for a dime back. This isn't about forgiveness anymore, it's about truth." He stopped pacing. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he turned away, shoulders shaking. The deputies worked in silence. Olivia retreated inside, slamming the door behind her. When she emerged 20 minutes later, she was holding a box and two small faces peeked from behind her legs. Noah. Ella. They looked so much smaller than I remembered. Ella clutched a stuffed bear by the arm. Noah's eyes darted between me and his parents. I stepped forward slowly. "Hey, kiddos," I said softly. "You okay?" Ella nodded, unsure. Noah didn't. He just stared at me with something that broke my heart, the look of a child trying to understand betrayal. Olivia's voice snapped like a whip. "Don't talk to them." I looked at her, then back at the kids. "Take care of each other, okay? That's what good families do." Olivia's jaw tightened. She turned away, shepherding them toward the car. When the last box was loaded, the deputy approached. "All done, Mr. Langford. The property's legally yours again." I nodded, staring at the house that had once symbolized love, now an empty shell of ego and regret. "Thank you, officer." He paused. "For what it's worth, sir, not many people would have done what you did. Most just let family walk all over them." I managed a thin smile. "It's not about winning, son. It's about not surrendering what's right." That night, I walked through the house alone. The air still carried faint traces of them: laundry detergent, perfume, a child's crayon mark on the hallway wall. In the living room, I found a single item left behind, a drawing. 2 stick figures on a blue background. One tall, one small. "Grandpa and me," it said in block letters. Noah's handwriting. I sat on the cold floor, the paper trembling in my hands. My throat tightened, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to cry. Not from guilt. Not from regret. But from relief that even through chaos, that little boy still saw me for who I was. Weeks passed. I had the house cleaned and repaired. Fresh paint, new locks, a deep silence that took getting used to. Then, one Saturday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID made my heart jump. Effie Morrison. It was Olivia. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." Her voice was thin, shaky. "Edward the First didn't call to fight." "That's a first," I said carefully. "I just wanted to say we're moving to Clearwater. Jonathan found a rental. Smaller place." "I see," I said. "And the kids, they miss you. Even after everything." My breath caught. "They told you that?" "Yes." A long pause. "I was wrong, Edward. About everything. I let pride make me cruel. I wanted to punish you for making me feel small, but all I did was break what little we had left." I leaned against the counter, staring at the quiet kitchen that had once echoed with my wife's laughter. "I didn't want to hurt you, Olivia. I just wanted you to remember that family isn't something you invoice." She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You always have a line for everything." "Maybe," I said, "but that one's true." Another silence. Then, hesitantly, she said, would you like to see the kids next weekend? For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just closed my eyes and let the weight lift. Yes, Olivia, I said finally. I'd like that very much. That Saturday, when Noah and Ella ran across the park to hug me, the noise in my chest finally quieted. We went fishing by the small lake near Clearwater. The sun was bright, the water calm, and the world for once felt right again. As Noah reeled in his first catch, he grinned up at me. See, Grandpa? We can still have fun even if Mom and Dad mess things up. I laughed, a sound that felt new again. You're wiser than you look, kiddo. Ella leaned against my shoulder. Are we still a family? I looked at both of them, the golden light reflecting off the water. Yes, I said. Maybe not the same as before, but better. Because now we know what it costs and it's worth every bit of it. That evening, I drove them home. Olivia was waiting by the curb, nervous but smiling. When I handed her the kids' backpacks, she whispered, "Thank you for coming." For never giving up, I corrected gently. As I walked back to my car, I glanced once more at the two little faces in the window waving goodbye. And I realized peace doesn't come from victory or revenge. It comes from boundaries, from truth, from love that refuses to vanish even after being tested. The price was steep: pride, money, sleepless nights, but in the end, I'd bought back something priceless: dignity, family, and the laughter of two children who would always know that love, real love, never comes with a receipt.